Hello everyone, my name is Ritesh and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is the editorial problem of Codechef August Long Challenge 2020. In this we will discuss second problem of Division 2, which is Chef and Linear Chess. Okay, if you have not seen my editorial video for the first problem, the link is in the description box below and also in the I button. So you can watch that. Okay. So now before discussing the logic of the problem, let us read the problem description from the Codechef website. Here is the problem statement. Let's start. Chef wants to play a game of linear chess on a one-dimensional board, an infinite row of squares numbered by positive integers. In this game, he has a pawn which is initially at square k. Okay, and along with chef there are also n other people numbered 1 through n. Chef can choose one of them to play against. For each valid I, the ith player would play in the following way. Now for every player other than chef there are some conditions how they can play. Okay, and what are the condition is, if the pawn is at a position pi, it can only move forward, and if it moves forward, it can move by pi squares. Okay, for example, if the position of a pawn is 2 initially, so it can only move forward in that board, and it can move forward with only p2 squares. So if initially the pawn is at 2, it will move forward to 4, then it will move forward to 6, then 8. Okay. So in this way, if the player moves their pawn to the square of chef's pawn, which is at position k, then chef's pawn is captured and he loses the game. Okay, and here we have to notice chef cannot move his pawn during the game. And what we have to find is, we have to find a player who can capture chef's pawn and reach the position k in smallest number of moves, or determine that no player can capture its pawn. Okay, here are the input instructions. The first line will be display the number of test cases, and the first line of every test case will give us two integers n, that is the number of players other than chef in the game, and k, which is the initial position of chef's pawn. And the second line of each test case give us in space separated integers p1 to pn. These are the integers which give us the information about the position of the pawn of each of the n player. Okay, and in the output we have to determine the starting square of one player that can beat chef in the smallest number of turns or smallest number of moves. If no player can do that, we have to print -1. Okay, I hope you all have understood the problem description. Now let's understand the logic of the program. Here are some points to consider. The first point is the board is one dimensional. The second point is the position of chef's pawn is at k and he can't move his pawn throughout the game. So we can say that the position of chef's pawn is fixed. And the third point is there are n other players in the game other than chef. Okay, now what other player has to do is they have to reach chef's pawn position, that is k, to capture chef's pawn. But while reaching chef's pawn position there is a condition. Now let's see what the condition is. Then if the pawn is initially on position 4, then it can only move in forward direction, and if it moves, it can move only 4 squares forward, okay, at a time. Why 4? Because the initial position of that pawn was 4, therefore it can only move 4 squares forward at a time. Okay, and this operation can be repeated any number of times to reach k. Okay, I hope you all have understood the basic points of the program, and now let's see the logic of the program through an example. So here is the chessboard, which is one dimensional. Okay, and as in the problem statement it has mentioned that there are infinite rows, but here I have mentioned only 10 rows of the linear chessboard. Okay, so at position 8 we have placed the chef's pawn. Okay, so the k in the problem will become 8. Okay, now there are 5 other players who are playing the game other than chef. Okay, the first player's pawn is at position 2, the second player's pawn is at position 3, similarly the third player's pawn is at position 4, and the fourth player pawn is at 7, and the fifth player pawn is at position 9. Okay, now what every player has to do is they has to reach position of chef's pawn, that is position 8. Okay, with minimum number of moves. But according to the problem we have seen that all the pawns should always move forward. So we can say that the player number 5 whose pawn is at position 9 can never reach position 8, because if this pawn at position 9 has to reach position 8, it has to follow a backward path. So this is not allowed according to the problem statement. Okay, now we are left with 4 other players. Now let's see how player 1 can move to the chef's pawn position. Okay, since player 1 pawn is initially at position 2, it can only move forward 2 squares at a time. Okay, that is, from 2 it will move to 4. Okay, now from 4 it can move to 6. Okay, similarly from 6 it can move to 8. Now you can see here that the pawn which was at position 2 can reach chef's pawn with 3 moves. Okay, now let's see the pawn of player number 2 which is at position 3. Now since its initial position is 3, so it can move 3 squares forward according to the given problem. So from 3 it will reach 6. Now from 6 it has to go to 9, because 6 plus 3 is 9. Now you can see the pawn at position 3 cannot reach chef's pawn position which is 8. So we can say that this pawn can never capture chef's pawn. Okay, now let's see the pawn of player 3 which is at position 4. Since it is at position 4, it can move 4 square forward, that is, it can reach from 4 to 8. This pawn has captured chef's pawn in only one move. Okay, now as you can see, the player 4 pawn cannot reach chef's pawn because initially is at this pawn is at 7. During the next move it will move to 14. This pawn cannot capture chef's pawn. Okay, now here we can see that the pawn which was at position 2 and the pawn which was at position 4 can only capture chef's pawn, but we need the pawn position who captures chef's pawn with minimum number of moves. So here we can see the pawn of player 1 which was on position 2 captures chef's pawn with 3 moves, and here the pawn of player 3 which was at position 4 captures at 1 move. So here 4 will be the solution to this example. Okay, now by looking at the example, what we can see here is, now to capture chef's pawn, the position of other pawn P should be less than K. This is the first condition, because if the position of the pawn is greater than K, so that pawn cannot follow a backward path. Okay, and the second condition is the position P of the pawn should completely divide K. Okay, now let's consider the position of pawn 2, 3 and 4. Here 2 can reach position of chef's pawn which is 8, because 2 completely divides 8. Okay, here 3 cannot reach the position of chef's pawn which is 8, because 3 cannot completely divide 8. Okay, similarly 4 completely divides 8, therefore the pawn at 4 reaches chef's pawn. Okay, now what completely divide means is, when we divide 4 with 8 we will get a remainder 0. So we can say that 4 divides 8 completely. Okay, when we divide 3 by 8, so we will get a remainder of 2. Okay, so we can say that 3 cannot divide 8 completely. Okay, so what we can say that to capture chef's pawn position, the first condition is the position of the pawn should be less than K, and the second condition is the value of position should completely divide the position of chef's pawn. Okay, I hope you understood this logic. Okay, now here 2 comma 4 are the positions of pawn that can reach K. Okay, so here there are only 2 pawns which can reach K, and those pawns are at position 2 and 4, and we want the position that can reach K with minimum moves. So we can say that the position which is closer to K and also it divides K completely can capture chef's pawn with minimum number of moves. So here 2 comma 4 are the position of 2 pawns which can reach position K. Okay, here 4 is closer to K and it divides 8, that is K, completely. Okay, so the max of all the positions which can capture chef's pawn is the solution to the problem. Okay, Now let us understand this logic again. Okay, now to capture chef's pawn, the position of other pawn p should be less than k. Okay, why? Because if the position of the pawn is greater than k, so then that pawn has to follow a backward path to capture chef's pawn. So this is not possible according to the problem. And to capture chef's pawn, the position p should completely divide k. Okay, now according to the problem, pawn at position 2 and 4 are the position of the pawns which can reach k. Now we want the position which can reach k with minimum moves. So the maximum of all the position will be the solution to the problem. Okay, so I hope you all have understood the logic. Now let's see the code of the problem. So here I have created two variables n and k to store the value of n and k, where n is the number of players other than chef playing chess, and k is the initial position of chef's pawn. Okay, I have also created an array to store the value of position of pawns of all the other n players. Okay, and in the array we are storing the position of the pawn of the ith player, and simultaneously we are checking whether this position completely divides k, which is the initial position of the chef. Okay, for to check whether the number completely divides or not, we have used modulus operator. If k mod array of I is equal to 0, then we can say that this pawn at position array of I can reach can capture chef's pawn. Okay, if this statement is true, we have to take max of the current value of position and the previous result. Okay, and in the end, after the loop ends, we have to print the result. Okay, I hope you all have understood the code. Now let's submit this code. Okay, I have uploaded the file. Now let's submit. Now as you can see, the code is accepted and we have scored 100% in this problem. Okay, okay friends, thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, then do like this video, and if you are a coding enthusiast, so please subscribe to my channel and press the bell icon for further notifications of the video. Thank you.